My daughter-in-law smiled at me on Christmas Eve and told me I wasn't welcome anymore. She said it sweetly, the way you'd tell a stray dog to stop following you home. $30,000. That's what I had given them 5 months earlier to save the house she was now locking me out of. But here's what Megan didn't know. While she was busy shutting me out, I had already opened something far more dangerous, her books. And the numbers told a story she never wanted anyone to read. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Because what happened, that Christmas didn't begin at the front door. It began hours earlier, in my kitchen, with flour on my hands and my late wife's voice still echoing in my head. My name is Walter Grayson. I am 71 years old. For 4 decades, I balanced ledgers for a living. A certified public accountant who spent his career making numbers tell the truth. I retired 6 years ago. And 5 years ago, I buried Dorothy, the woman who made every number in my life add up to something worth counting. That Christmas morning I woke before dawn. The house on Southeast Spokane Street was quiet, the way it always is now. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind that reminds you someone is missing. I put on the coffee and opened the cabinet above the stove, where Dorothy's ceramic pie dish still sat on the top shelf, right where she left it. I hadn't touched it in over a year, but something about that morning made me reach for it. I wanted to bake her pie, the apple cinnamon recipe she perfected over 30 years of Christmas mornings. Same dish. Same careful crimping of the crust. Same dusting of sugar across the top that she used to call her signature. Dorothy never measured with precision, which always drove me crazy. I'm a man who trusts exact numbers. She trusted her hands. But somehow, every Christmas, that pie came out smelling like everything good in the world. Warm apples, cinnamon bark, brown sugar melting into butter, and something underneath all of it that I could never name, but always recognized. Home. That's what it smelled like. I followed her recipe card, the one written in her looping handwriting on a stained index card pinned inside the cabinet door. My hands moved slowly, clumsier than hers ever were. The dough cracked where it should have folded. The crimping looked more like a child's attempt than a baker's craft. But I pressed on, because bringing that pie to my son's house felt like carrying a piece of Dorothy with me, a bridge between the family we used to be and whatever we had become. While the pie baked, I sat at the kitchen table watching the Portland sky grow heavy with clouds that looked like they might do something unusual. Portland doesn't get much snow. Rain is the language this city speaks. But that morning, the air had a different bite to it. Sharper, colder, like the weather itself was preparing for something. I thought about Derek, my son, 40 years old, a software engineer. Quiet in the way people become when they've spent too long avoiding difficult conversations. 5 months earlier, he had called me in a panic. His voice shook the way it used to when he was small and something scared him. The foundation of their house on Southeast Bybee Boulevard was failing. Cracks spreading through the basement walls. The contractor wanted $30,000, and the bank wouldn't extend their credit. I didn't hesitate. A father doesn't hesitate when his child is afraid. I wired the money the next day, $30,000 pulled from my retirement savings. I told him it was a loan, because I didn't want him to feel the weight of charity. But truthfully, I would have given him twice that without blinking. Dorothy used to say I trusted people too easily, especially people who shared my last name. She was right about a lot of things. She was probably right about that too. The distance between Derek and me had grown steadily since the money changed hands. Calls became shorter. Visits became rarer. Megan, who had never been warm toward me, grew colder in ways I tried not to notice. I made excuses for all of it. They were busy. They were stressed. I told myself what lonely people always tell themselves, that the silence didn't mean what it felt like it meant. The oven timer pulled me back. I opened the door, and the scent rushed out, apples and cinnamon and something faintly sweet that made my chest tighten. It wasn't perfect. The crust had cracked along one edge, and the sugar had browned a shade darker than Dorothy would have allowed. But it was ours. Hers and mine. I wrapped it carefully, placed it in the ceramic dish, and carried it to the car as if it were made of glass. The drive from Spokane Street to Bybee Boulevard takes about 10 minutes on a quiet evening. That night, it felt longer. Portland had dressed itself for Christmas: strings of lights across porches, wreaths on doors, inflatable snowmen leaning sideways in front yards. Every window I passed glowed with warmth, and behind every glow, I imagined families doing what families are supposed to do on Christmas Eve. Dorothy used to call this the hour when families come together. She believed Christmas had a gravity to it, a pull that drew people closer no matter how far apart they had drifted. I held on to that belief the way I held on to the pie, carefully, desperately, knowing it was fragile but unwilling to let go. When I turned onto Bybee Boulevard, their house glowed at the end of the block. Every window was lit. I could see the silhouette of the Christmas tree through the front curtain, and for a moment, I let myself imagine what it might be like inside. Sophie's laughter, the smell of roasted ham, Mason tugging at someone's sleeve, Derek smiling the way he used to when his mother was alive. I parked along the curb, picked up the pie, and stepped into the cold. The first flakes of snow had begun to fall light, uncertain, as if Portland itself wasn't sure it was ready for this. I walked up the driveway, past the hedge Megan had trimmed into sharp angles, past the porch railing I had helped Derek replace 2 summers ago, up the 3 steps to the front door. I straightened my coat, took one slow breath, and knocked. The door swung open faster than I expected, and there she stood. Megan. Her eyes found me immediately, and something flickered across her face. Not surprise, not warmth, but a brief calculation. As if she were deciding in real time how much effort I was worth. She tilted her head, and the word that came out of her mouth landed like a stone dropped from a height I didn't see coming. "Walter, we weren't expecting you." She didn't step aside. That was the first thing I noticed. When someone opens their door on Christmas Eve and sees family standing on the porch holding a homemade pie, the natural thing to do is step aside. Invite them in. Take their coat. But Megan planted her hand on the doorframe the way someone blocks an entrance they have no intention of opening further. Behind her, the house exhaled warmth. I caught the scent of roasted ham and garlic, the faint jingle of a holiday playlist, drifting from somewhere inside. Through the narrow gap between Megan and the frame, I could see the tree, the one Derek and the kids must have decorated together, glowing in soft white lights near the staircase. "This is a family evening, Walter," she said. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "Just us." For a moment I thought I had misheard her. My hearing has faded slightly over the years, and sometimes sharp words arrive, softened by the time they reach me. But there was nothing soft about the way she held that doorframe, nothing ambiguous about the wall she had built between me and the light behind her. "Megan," I managed, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. "It's Christmas. I brought Dorothy's pie. I thought we could all sit together and—" "We've already eaten," she said, cutting me off without a flinch. "And honestly, it would have been better if you had called first." Called first. As if visiting my own son on Christmas Eve required an appointment. As if I were a salesman rather than a father. The pie in my hands suddenly felt heavier, as though gravity itself had taken her side. Then Derek appeared behind her. My son. He wore a plain gray sweater, hands tucked into the pockets of his jeans, shoulders drawn inward, like a man trying to take up less space in his own home. His eyes moved across my face, paused on the pie, and then slid away as if looking at me too long caused him physical discomfort. "Dad," he said quietly. Not warmly, not coldly, just flatly, the way you acknowledge something you wish wasn't there. "Derek," I said, searching his face for the boy I raised. "I just wanted to spend Christmas with my family. That's all." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Megan glanced at him sideways, a quick, sharp look that carried instructions without words. He received them. "We don't need your help anymore, Dad," he said. "Stop making everything about money." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, though they were, but because they were so carefully emptied of feeling. He spoke as if reciting something he had practiced, or been told to practice, until it sounded natural enough to pass as his own thought. I opened my mouth to respond, to remind him that I had never made anything about money, that the $30,000 I gave them had been about love, not leverage, but a sound from inside the house stopped me. A small voice drifted down from the staircase. "Is Grandpa staying for dinner?" Sophie. She stood halfway up the stairs, gripping the banister with one hand. In her other hand, she held a colored pencil, a deep blue one, the kind she always carried when she was drawing. Her Christmas dress caught the warm glow of the tree lights, and her brown curls framed a face that looked far too serious for a 10-year-old on Christmas Eve. Our eyes met. In hers I saw something that made my chest crack open, confusion, sadness, and a quiet understanding that no child her age should have to carry. She knew something was wrong. She couldn't name it yet, but she felt it the way children feel storms before the sky changes color. Megan didn't turn around. She didn't acknowledge Sophie's voice at all. Instead, she pushed the door forward, not a slam, but a deliberate narrowing of the gap, a slow erasure of the warmth behind her. "Good night, Walter," she said. Derek looked at the floor. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't reach for the pie. He didn't step forward. He simply stood there. A man caught between the woman who controlled his present and the father who represented his past, choosing neither but defaulting to the one who frightened him more. The door closed. Firmly. Completely. The wreath on the outside trembled from the impact, and a small cluster of fake berries fell onto the welcome mat at my feet. I stood there, holding Dorothy's pie, surrounded by Christmas lights I could have sworn I helped hang last year. Snow collected on my shoulders. The muffled sound of the playlist continued inside, cheerful and indifferent, as though the house itself had already forgotten I existed. Then I heard her voice. Megan's. Low but unmistakable, through the wood and the cold night air. "He's a burden, Derek. The sooner you accept that, the sooner we can move on." The word hit me the way a bullet hits before you hear the shot. Burden, not difficult, not complicated. Burden, something heavy, something you carry until you find a place to set it down and walk away from. I stood frozen, the pie dish burning warm against my palms while the rest of me turned to ice. And then faintly, almost lost beneath the wind, I heard another sound from inside. A soft, tearing. Paper being pulled apart slowly, carefully, the way a child tears a page from a sketchbook when she wants to keep what she's drawn but doesn't want anyone to hear her doing it. I didn't understand that sound then. It would take weeks before its meaning became clear to me, but I would remember it, that quiet ripping beneath the music and the cruelty, long after everything else about that night had sharpened into focus. I stepped off the porch. The snow was falling harder now, covering the driveway in a thin white layer that made everything look clean and untouched, as though the world were trying to hide what had just happened beneath something pure. I walked toward the street, each step heavier than the last. The pie cooling in my hands, the lights from Derek's windows shrinking behind me, until they were nothing more than a faint glow I no longer belonged to. The cold didn't bother me. What bothered me was the silence growing inside my own chest, the slow, spreading realization that I had become a stranger to my own blood. Portland doesn't get snow often. When it does, the city slows down as if caught off guard, unsure how to behave under a sky that speaks a different language. That night, the snow fell in soft, hesitant flakes that seemed as uncertain as I felt, drifting without purpose, landing without sound, covering everything in a silence that made the world feel both beautiful and unbearably empty. I walked, not toward anything, just away, away from the lights, away from the closed door, away from the word that still pressed against the inside of my skull like a thumbprint on wet clay. Burden. The sidewalks of Selwood were quiet. Most people were indoors, wrapped in the kind of warmth I had come looking for and been denied. I passed houses I had walked past 1,000 times before the Duncan's place with its crooked mailbox, the blue Victorian on the corner where someone always put out luminarias along the path, the old brick duplex where Dorothy and I once attended a neighborhood potluck, so crowded we ate standing up in the kitchen. Every block held a memory. That was the cruelty of walking through a place you had loved with someone who was gone. The streets hadn't changed. The trees hadn't changed, but the person beside me had vanished. And without her, every familiar corner felt like a room with a missing wall. I passed the small coffee shop on Southeast Milwaukee Avenue, the one with the green awning where Dorothy used to order her tea every Saturday morning. She never drank coffee. Said it made her thoughts move too fast. Tea, she insisted. Let her think at the speed of kindness. I used to laugh at that. Now, I would give anything to hear her say it one more time. The cold reached through my coat and settled into my joints the way it does when you're past 70 and your body has started keeping score. My fingers ached around the pie dish. My knees stiffened with every step, but I didn't hurry. Rushing felt pointless. There was no one waiting for me at the other end of this walk. No voice calling from the kitchen. No light left on in the hallway, because someone wanted to make sure I found my way home. Dorothy used to say that Christmas isn't about being invited, it's about showing up anyway. She believed people needed each other most during the holidays, even when they pretended otherwise. Especially when they pretended otherwise. She would have shown up at Derek's door tonight too. She would have knocked and smiled and refused to leave until someone let her in. And they would have. Because Dorothy had a way of making closed doors feel ridiculous. But Dorothy wasn't here. And without her, I was just an old man, carrying a pie through the snow, trying to remember why he thought tonight would be different. I turned onto Spokane Street and slowed as I neared my house. The porch light was off. I had forgotten to turn it on before I left, so certain I wouldn't be coming home alone. The dark windows stared back at me like empty eyes, and for a moment I considered just standing there, letting the snow bury me one flake at a time until I blended into the landscape and disappeared. But then I noticed something. A warm glow spilling from the house next door. Ruth Bellamy's living room window cast a soft amber rectangle across her front yard. Steady and alive. In the years since her husband passed, Ruth had kept that window lit every evening without fail. She once told me it was a habit from her nursing days, always leave a light on, so people know someone's still awake, still watching, still there if they need you. I hadn't planned to stop. But my feet slowed on their own, the way a compass needle swings toward north without being told. I stood under the streetlight near her walkway, snow gathering on my shoulders, the pie dish cooling against my chest. Her front door opened before I reached it. Ruth stood in the frame, wrapped in a thick cardigan, her silver hair pulled back loosely. She wasn't startled. She looked like someone who had been checking the window every few minutes, waiting for something she hoped wouldn't happen but suspected would. "Walter," she called, her voice carrying just enough urgency to cut through the numbness wrapping itself around me. "What are you doing out here?" "It's nearly 9, I tried to answer. My mouth opened, but the words dissolved before they could form. My jaw had locked, not from the cold but from the effort of holding everything inside, the humiliation, the grief, the slow-building awareness that my own family had decided I was disposable. Ruth studied me for a long moment. Her eyes moved from my face to the pie dish, to the snow accumulating on my coat. I watched her expression shift, curiosity folding into concern, concern sharpening into something more protective. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't press or prod. She simply stepped out onto the porch, walked down the 2 steps in her house slippers as if the cold meant nothing to her, and placed both hands gently on the pie dish. "Come inside," she said. Not a question, not a suggestion. A quiet command delivered with the authority of a woman who had spent 30 years as a nurse, telling frightened people exactly what they needed to do next. She lifted the dish from my hands as carefully as if she knew it carried more than food, as if she understood that letting go of it meant letting go of Dorothy, of tradition, of the last thread connecting me to the family I thought I still had. I let her take it. And the moment the weight left my palms, something inside me shifted, loosened, threatened to crack. She turned toward the door, and I followed. I didn't decide to. My legs simply moved, drawn toward the warmth the way anything frozen moves toward heat when it has been cold long enough to forget what warmth feels like. At the threshold, I paused. Ruth looked back, one hand on the doorframe, but unlike Megan, she held it open. Wide open. As if the whole house were reaching out to pull me in. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said softly. I swallowed. The snow melted on my collar and traced a cold line down my neck. "Maybe I have," I whispered. "Maybe I've become one." Ruth held my gaze for a beat. Then something in her eyes hardened, not with anger, but with recognition. The look of someone who had seen suffering before and refused to let it pass unchallenged. She stepped aside, and the light swallowed me whole. Ruth's house smelled the way safety should: lavender, fir needles, and something baking that I couldn't name but immediately trusted. The warmth hit me the moment I crossed the threshold. Not just the physical heat from the radiator clicking softly in the corner, but something deeper, the warmth of a space that had been lived in honestly, maintained with care, and kept open for exactly the kind of moment I was stumbling into. She guided me to the living room without a word. A small fireplace crackled against the far wall, casting uneven light across a room filled with bookshelves, framed photographs, and a knitted blanket draped over the arm of a sofa that had clearly held its share of difficult conversations. Ruth set Dorothy's pie on the kitchen counter gently, reverently, and disappeared for a moment before returning with a steaming mug. "Apple tea," she said, placing it in front of me. "Drink it slow." I wrapped my hands around the mug and stared at the surface of the tea, watching the steam curl upward and vanish. The heat crept into my fingers, then my wrists, then slowly up my arms. But it stopped somewhere around my chest, unable to reach the part of me that had frozen the moment Megan said that word. Ruth sat down across from me. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't lean forward with wide eyes waiting for a story. She simply sat, hands folded in her lap, her expression patient and still, the way someone waits at a bedside when they know the person lying there needs time before they can speak. I recognized that patience. It was a nurse's patience, the kind earned through decades of sitting with people in their worst moments, knowing that silence sometimes heals faster than words. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The fire popped. The wind pressed against the windows. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly, its tires whispering through the gathering snow. Then I opened my mouth, and everything came out. I told her about the pie, about driving through Portland imagining what Christmas might feel like again, about standing on the porch with my heart lodged somewhere near my throat while Megan blocked the doorway as though I were selling something she didn't want, about Derek standing behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes on the floor, saying words that sounded borrowed from someone else's script. I told her about Sophie, about the blue pencil in her small hand and the look on her face, confusion wrapped around a sadness no 10-year-old should understand, about the question she asked that nobody answered. "Is Grandpa staying for dinner?" And I told her the word. The one Megan had spoken through the closed door, as though it were a fact rather than a cruelty. Burden. My voice cracked on it. Not dramatically, not like a dam breaking, more like a hinge, rusting in real time, a slow, grinding failure of the mechanism I had built to keep myself composed. I set the mug down because my hands were shaking too badly to hold it, and I pressed my palms flat against my knees. I hadn't cried since Dorothy's funeral. 5 years of grief. 5 years of lonely mornings and empty evenings. 5 years of setting 2 places at the table, out of habit, before remembering I only needed one. And through all of it, I had held myself together with the stubbornness of a man who believed that falling apart was the same as giving up. But that night, In Ruth's living room, something I had been holding for 5 years finally gave way. The tears came without permission, without sound at first, just a blurring of the fireplace, and a stinging heat behind my eyes that spread until my whole face felt like it was dissolving. Then my shoulders shook, then my breath caught, and then I was crying in a way I hadn't cried since I was a boy, openly, helplessly, with no concern for dignity, because dignity had already been stripped from me on that porch. Ruth didn't interrupt. She didn't reach for tissues or offer hollow reassurances. She let me grieve the way a nurse lets a patient grieve fully, without interference, understanding that the pain needed a way out before anything useful could take its place. When the worst of it passed, I sat there emptied, staring at the fire through swollen eyes. My chest ached as if something physical had torn loose inside it. But the pressure, that suffocating pressure I had carried from the porch to the sidewalk to her door, had eased. Just slightly. Just enough. Ruth reached over and placed her hand on mine. Her palm was warm and steady, her fingers calloused in the way a working woman's hands get after decades of caring for others. "Walter," she said softly, "you didn't do anything wrong." I swallowed, unable to respond. She held my gaze. In my 30 years as a nurse, I watched families do terrible things to people they claimed to love. I sat with patients whose children emptied their bank accounts while they were still in the hospital bed. I held the hands of men and women who gave everything they had to their families and got nothing back but silence. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the weight behind it, the accumulated grief of someone who had witnessed suffering not once or twice, but as a career. "It always starts the same way," she continued. "A favor, a loan, a promise to pay it back. Then the distance, then the excuses, then the blame." She paused. "And it always ends with the elder wondering what they did wrong. But Walter, they didn't do anything wrong. And neither did you." The fire crackled softly. The wind had quieted outside, as if the world itself had leaned in to listen. I looked down at her hand on mine. Such a simple gesture, such an ordinary kindness. But in that moment, it felt like the first solid thing I had touched in hours. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, drew one long breath, then another. The ache was still there, but beneath it, something else was forming, faint, unfamiliar, and stubborn. "I won't let them erase me," I said quietly. The words surprised me. They came from somewhere I hadn't visited in years, a place deeper than grief, deeper than pride, somewhere near the foundation of who I was before loss and loneliness had worn me down. Ruth studied me for a moment, and I saw something shift behind her eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition, the look of someone who had been waiting for that sentence without knowing it. She nodded slowly. Then she leaned forward, her voice dropping to something just above a whisper. "Good," she said. "Because I think there's more to this than a bad Christmas, Walter. I think someone's been lying to you for a very long time." The fire popped. The words settled over me like a second skin, and somewhere in the silence that followed, a part of my mind, the part that had spent 40 years hunting for errors in rows of numbers, quietly woke up. I couldn't sleep. Not because of the cold or the silence or even the ache still lodged in my chest. I couldn't sleep because Ruth's words had triggered something inside me, the same instinct that used to wake me at 2 in the morning when a ledger didn't balance, a feeling that sat in the base of my skull and refused to leave. Something is wrong with the numbers. I had thanked Ruth for the tea, for the patience, for being the only person that night who treated me like I still mattered. Then I walked the few steps back to my own front door and stepped inside a house that felt colder than when I had left it. Not in temperature, in spirit. I set Dorothy's pie on the kitchen counter and stood there staring at it for a long time. The ceramic dish caught the light from the small lamp above the stove, and for a moment I saw her hands instead of mine, her fingers pressing the dough, her wrist turning the plate, her smile when the crust came out just right. I blinked, and the vision dissolved. Just a pie, just a dish, Just another thing no one wanted tonight. I tried to go to bed. I lay down, stared at the ceiling, and closed my eyes. But every time the darkness settled, Ruth's voice came back. It always starts with a favor, a loan, a promise to pay it back. Then the distance. Then the blame. A favor. $30,000. A promise. We'll pay you back, Dad. I swear. Distance. Shorter calls. Canceled visits. Silence where there used to be conversation. Blame. Stop making everything about money. The pattern was there. Clear as a column of numbers that didn't add up. At some point past midnight, I stopped pretending sleep was possible. I got up, turned on the small lamp by my recliner, and walked to the desk in the corner of the living room where I kept important papers. The bottom drawer held a folder Derek had given me 5 months ago, the one containing the repair invoices and bank documents related to the foundation work. I hadn't looked at them since the day I wired the money. There had been no reason to. He was my son. The invoices were real. The emergency was real. A father doesn't audit his child's crisis. But a father who's been called a burden on Christmas Eve starts asking questions he should have asked months ago. I spread the papers across the coffee table, smoothing them flat under the lamplight. The invoice from the repair company sat on top, a single page, neatly formatted, listing the scope of work and the total cost. Foundation stabilization, drainage correction, structural reinforcement. Total. $30,000. I read it again. $30,000 even. In 40 years of accounting, I have reviewed thousands of invoices from hundreds of contractors, plumbers, electricians, and builders. Not once, not a single time has a construction job come out to a perfectly round number. There are always odd cents. Material costs fluctuate. Labor is calculated by the hour. A real invoice from a real contractor might land at $29,847.63. It might round to the nearest hundred if someone is being generous. But $30,000 flat, to the penny, is the number someone writes when they are inventing a cost rather than calculating one. My pulse quickened. I pulled the invoice closer and looked at the header. Ridgemont Foundation Services. An address in Tigard, Oregon. A phone number, and an employer identification number printed beneath the company name. The EIN stopped me cold. It read as a 9-digit string, 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 9, 1 with no hyphen. Every legitimate EIN issued by the Internal Revenue Service follows a specific format. 2 digits, a hyphen, then 7 digits, 82-3457691. It's a small thing, the kind of detail most people would never notice. But I had spent 4 decades entering those numbers into tax filings and audit reports. I could spot a malformed EIN the way a musician spots an out-of-tune note instantly, instinctively, without needing to think about it. I grabbed my laptop from the desk and searched the company name. Ridgemont Foundation Services, Tigard, Oregon. No results. Not a website. Not a business listing. Not a review on any contractor directory. Not even a mention on the Oregon Secretary of State's business registry, where every legitimate company in the state is required to file. I checked the spelling 3 times. I tried variations. Ridgemont Foundation. Ridgemont Services. Ridgemont Repair. Nothing. The company Derek had given me, the company I had paid $30,000 to, was a ghost. A name on a piece of paper with no body behind it. My hands trembled as I set the laptop aside and pulled the bank statements from the bottom of the folder. I had printed them months ago and never reviewed them, a failure that now felt criminal in its negligence. I scanned each line mechanically at first, my eyes running down the familiar columns of dates, descriptions, and amounts. Deposits, withdrawals, transfers. The ordinary rhythm of a retired man's finances. Then a line stopped me. Not in the checking account. Not in the savings. In a section, I almost missed a summary page for a credit product I didn't recognize. Home equity line of credit. HELOC. Opened 4 months ago. Drawn against my property at 1427 Southeast Spokane Street. Principal borrowed $52,000. Primary borrower Walter Raymond Grayson. My breath stopped. Not figuratively. I felt my lungs seize as though the air itself had solidified inside my chest. I read the line again, and a fourth time, each reading slower than the last, each one confirming what the numbers were telling me in the language I had trusted my entire life. Someone had opened a line of credit against my home. Someone had borrowed $52,000 using my name, my address, my identity. And I had never signed a single page. The lamp flickered once, a brief interruption in the light that made the numbers on the page seem to pulse, and in that half-second of darkness, I felt the ground beneath me shift in a way that had nothing to do with foundations or concrete or the earth under my house. It was the ground of everything I believed about my family. And it had just cracked wide open. For a long time, I simply sat there. The HELOC summary page glowed under the lamplight, like a wound that had just been uncovered. Raw and undeniable. My hands rested on the edges of the coffee table, pressing down as if the table might float away if I let go. $52,000. Borrowed against the house Dorothy and I bought in 1982, the house where we raised Derek, the house where I had planned to live out whatever years I had left, surrounded by the walls that still held her voice. Someone had used my name to turn that house into collateral. And I hadn't known. I forced myself to move. My fingers shook as I pulled the HELOC packet from the bottom of the folder, a thick set of pages held together by a black binder clip. The paperwork was detailed, official-looking, printed on heavy stock paper with embossed headers from a lending institution I recognized. Everything about it was designed to appear legitimate. I turned the pages slowly, scanning each one. My address, my date of birth, my social security number, my employment history: retired, former CPA, 40 years of practice. Every line was accurate, every detail correct. Someone had done their research. Someone had taken the time to learn the shape of my life before they tried to steal it. Then I reached the signature page. My name sat at the bottom of the approval form in dark blue ink. Walter R. Grayson, written in a looping hand that leaned forward with a confidence the rest of the document couldn't support. I stared at it. The longer I looked, the more it revealed. I know my own handwriting the way I know my own face. After 40 years of signing tax returns, audit reports, client letters, and pension forms, my signature has become as automatic as breathing. It's small, compact. The letters sit upright with almost no slant. My capital W has a sharp first peak. My G carries a distinct downward hook that curls inward rather than looping wide. And the R in my middle initial is barely more than a vertical stroke with a small bump, a shorthand I developed in my 30s and never changed. The signature on the HELOC form had none of that. The W was too wide. Its peaks rounded instead of sharp. The letters leaned forward at an angle I had never written at in my life. The G looped outward in a broad circle, missing the inward curl entirely, and the R had been given a full, deliberate shape that looked nothing like the compressed mark I had made tens of thousands of times. I reached for the cabinet under the coffee table and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were documents that carried my real signature, my pension enrollment forms, the deed to the house, Dorothy's death certificate, even a birthday card I had signed for Sophie 2 years ago that she had returned to me with a drawing on the back. I laid them beside the HELOC form. Under the lamplight, the differences screamed. It wasn't even close. Whoever had signed that form knew the general shape of my name, the right letters in the right order, but they didn't know its fingerprint. They didn't know the pressure I applied to the downstroke of the W. They didn't know the way my pen lifted between the T and the E in Walter. They didn't know that my signature was a 40-year habit written by a hand that valued precision above all else. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a clerical error or a misplaced page. Someone had sat down with a pen, studied my name, and practiced until they believed they could become me on paper. My stomach turned. I pressed my fingers against my forehead and breathed slowly, trying to keep the nausea from climbing higher. I had always believed that the worst thing anyone could do was turn their back on family. But forging a signature borrowing against someone's home without their knowledge, stealing their identity and their security in a single stroke of ink, that was something else entirely. That was erasure. The kind that doesn't just take your money, it takes your name. I turned back to the bank statements. I needed to know where the money went. $52,000 doesn't vanish. It lands somewhere. And wherever it landed, it would leave a trail. The HELOC disbursement showed a single transfer, the full amount, moved in one transaction to an account I didn't recognize. The account number meant nothing to me, but the routing number matched a regional credit union in Portland. I opened my laptop again and began searching. It took me less than 20 minutes. The account was tied to a limited liability company registered with the state of Oregon. I found it through the Secretary of State's business registry, the same database that had returned nothing for Ridgemont Foundation services. This time, the search returned a result. Westbrook Properties, LLC. Registered 8 months ago. Business type: real estate investment. Registered agent: Megan Grayson. I read her name 3 times. Each time it landed harder, like a stone dropped from increasing heights. Megan, my daughter-in-law. The woman who had stood in the doorway of the house I helped save and called me a burden. She hadn't just insulted me. She hadn't just shut me out of Christmas. She had opened a line of credit in my name, forged my signature, borrowed $52,000 against the home I shared with Dorothy for over 40 years, and funneled every cent into a company she controlled. I leaned back in the recliner and stared at the ceiling. The lamplight cast long shadows across the room, stretching the shapes of furniture into unfamiliar forms. The house felt different now, not empty the way it usually did, but exposed. As if the walls themselves had thinned and something dangerous had been standing just on the other side all along. Dorothy used to say I could smell a bad number from 3 rooms away. She meant it as a compliment, though she also used it to tease me when I spent too long rechecking the grocery receipt. She would have smelled this one too. She would have caught it months ago, probably before I ever wired the $30,000. But she wasn't here, and I had trusted the wrong people for too long. I looked at the clock. Nearly 5 in the morning. Through the window, the first gray light of the day after Christmas crept across the sky, thin and reluctant, as if the sun itself wasn't sure it wanted to see what was waiting below. I closed the laptop, stacked the papers, placed the forged signature page on top, where I could see it. For 40 years, I had made numbers tell the truth. Now, the truth was staring back at me from my own kitchen table. And it was uglier than anything I had ever audited. But I was done looking away. I needed air. The house had grown too small for everything I now carried inside it. The forged signature, the phantom company, the $52,000 that had been bled from my home while I sat in my recliner, trusting the people who were bleeding me dry. I gathered the papers into a manila folder, pressed the edges flat, and walked to the front door. The porch was dark. The snow had stopped sometime in the last hour, leaving a thin white layer across the steps that glowed faintly under the streetlights. The air was sharp enough to sting, but I welcomed it. I needed something real, something physical, to cut through the fog of what I had just uncovered. I stood there holding that folder the way a man holds a diagnosis. He hasn't yet accepted tightly, at arm's length, hoping it might somehow change if he looks away long enough. But numbers don't change. That's what makes them honest. That's what makes them dangerous. Across the fence, a light clicked on in Ruth's kitchen. A yellow square appeared in the darkness, steady and warm, followed by the faint movement of a silhouette behind the curtain. Ruth had always been an early riser, a habit from her nursing years, she once told me. 3 decades of night shifts and emergency calls had rewired her internal clock so thoroughly that sleeping past 5 felt like a moral failing. Her front door opened before I had decided whether to walk over. She stood in the frame, wearing a heavy cardigan over flannel pajamas, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, a mug already in her hand. "Walter," she said, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone who can read a situation before it's been explained. "Why are all your lights on?" I held up the folder. "Because I found what you told me I would." She didn't ask me to elaborate on the porch. She stepped aside, held the door wide, and waited until I was inside before closing it behind me. The kitchen smelled of coffee, strong, dark, the kind she brewed when she expected a long morning. She poured me a cup without asking if I wanted one, and sat down at the small table near the window, where the first gray light of dawn had begun to press against the glass. I opened the folder and laid the pages out between us. The forged signature, the HELOC summary, the Ridgemont invoice with its fabricated EIN, the Westbrook Properties LLC registration bearing Megan's name. I arranged them in order the way I would have arranged evidence for an audit, chronologically, logically, each document building on the one before it. Ruth studied them in silence. She picked up the HELOC signature page first, held it close to her face, then set it beside the pension form I had brought for comparison. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She moved to the LLC filing next, her eyes narrowing as she read Megan's name at the bottom. When she looked up, her expression had changed. The gentle concern from last night had hardened into something more resolute, more familiar. The face of a woman who had seen this kind of damage before and knew exactly how deep it could go. "I told you," she said quietly. "Someone was lying. It's worse than lying, Ruth. It's forgery. Identity theft." "She opened a credit line against my house." Ruth nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had suspected but hoped wasn't true. She set the papers down and folded her hands around her mug. "Walter, I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I've never told you before." I waited. In my last year of nursing, I was assigned to a long-term care facility on the east side. There was a woman there, Edith Henderson, 80 years old, sharp mind, kind heart. She reminded me of my own mother. Ruth paused, staring into her coffee. Her daughter-in-law had power of attorney. Over the course of 2 years, she drained every account Edith had: savings, pension, Social Security. She sold the house while Edith was still in a hospital bed recovering from a hip replacement. By the time Edith understood what had happened, there was nothing left. The kitchen was quiet except for the refrigerator humming in the corner. "What happened to her?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "She was moved to a state facility, the cheapest one they could find. A room with no window and a mattress that smelled like disinfectant." Ruth's voice tightened. "She died 6 months later. Not from the hip. Not from illness. The doctors wrote cardiac failure on the certificate. But I was there, Walter. I held her hand the night she passed. And what killed Edith Henderson wasn't her heart giving out. It was heartbreak. The kind that comes from realizing that the people you sacrificed everything for were the same ones who took everything away." I felt the air leave my lungs slowly, as if my body were trying to make itself smaller under the weight of her story. "She waited too long to fight," Ruth continued. 3 years of silence. 3 years of hoping they would stop on their own. 3 years of telling herself it was a misunderstanding. She looked at me, and her eyes were fierce. By the time she asked for help, the house was gone. The money was gone, and she had nothing left to fight with. She reached across the table and gripped my wrist, not gently this time, but firmly, the way a nurse grips someone she's trying to keep conscious. "You still have time, Walter. You still have your home. You still have your mind." Her voice steadied. "And you have something Edith didn't have. You have 40 years of knowing how to read the numbers they tried to hide. Don't waste that. Don't wait." The dawn was creeping higher now, turning the kitchen window from gray to pale gold. I looked at the papers spread across the table, every lie mapped, every forgery documented, every trail leading back to the same name. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands trembled, but my breathing was even. Ruth watched me without speaking, her grip still firm on my wrist, as if transferring her steadiness directly into my veins. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name Ruth had given me the night before. Patricia Vance, elder law attorney, downtown Portland. I pressed the number. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voicemail professional, brief, inviting me to leave a message. I cleared my throat. And when I spoke, my voice was clearer than it had been in days. Miss Vance, my name is Walter Grayson. I'm 71 years old. And I believe my daughter-in-law has stolen my identity. She forged my signature on a home equity line of credit, fabricated invoices for repairs that never happened, and funneled the money into a company she controls. I paused. Took one breath. I have the numbers to prove it. All of them. I'll bring everything to your office as soon as you'll see me. I ended the call. Set the phone on the table. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, the trembling in my hands stopped. Patricia Vance called back at 7:45 the next morning. I had been sitting at the kitchen table since dawn, nursing a cup of coffee I barely tasted, running through the numbers one more time to make sure I hadn't made an error. I hadn't. The numbers were clean. The crime was not. Her voice on the phone was direct and unhurried. She asked 3 questions: my name, the nature of the issue, and whether I had documentation. When I answered yes to the third, she said, "Come in at 10, and gave me the address. No small talk, no reassurances, just efficiency. I liked her already. Her office occupied the 2nd floor of a modest brick building near Pioneer Courthouse Square, the kind of structure that blends so quietly into downtown Portland you could walk past it 100 times without noticing. No gilded lettering on the windows, no marble lobby, just a narrow staircase, a glass door with her name etched in simple font, and the faint scent of paper and old wood as I stepped inside. The waiting room held 2 chairs and a single framed certificate on the wall. No magazines, no music, no distractions. Everything about the space said the same thing: we are here to work. A receptionist led me down a short hallway to Vance's office. The room was lined with shelves, arranged with a precision that bordered on architectural. Law books stood at uniform heights. Folders were labeled in the same clean handwriting. Even her pens sat in a ceramic cup with their caps aligned. It reminded me of the way I used to organize my own workspace. Everything in its place, every detail accounted for, because order is the first defense against chaos. Vance stood behind her desk. She was in her early 50s, lean, with dark hair pulled back, and eyes that moved with the kind of sharpness that suggested she had long ago stopped tolerating nonsense. She offered her hand. Her grip was firm, brief, and entirely without warmth, not because she was unkind, but because warmth wasn't what this meeting required. "Sit," she said. "Show me what you have." I opened the folder and laid the documents across her desk in the same order I had arranged them for Ruth chronologically, each page building on the last. The fabricated invoice from Ridgemont Foundation Services, the HELOC summary, the forged signature page beside my real signatures for comparison, the Westbrook Properties LLC filing with Megan's name, the bank transfer records tracing the money from my home equity into her company. Vance examined each page with the same deliberate attention I would have given a suspicious audit. She held the signature pages side by side, tilting them under her desk lamp. She ran her finger along the EIN on the invoice, pausing at the missing hyphen. She pulled up the Oregon Secretary of State website on her computer and confirmed the LLC registration herself. When she finished, she set the papers down, leaned back in her chair, and looked at me. "Mr. Grayson," she said, "you've done half my job for me." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. "Most clients who sit in that chair bring me feelings," she continued. "They bring me anger and suspicion and a vague sense that something is wrong. They want me to figure out what happened." She tapped the edge of my folder. "You brought me a spreadsheet. You brought me evidence organized by date, cross-referenced with source documents, and verified against public records. That's not what I usually see. I was an accountant for 40 years, I said. It's the only way I know how to think. A faint flicker crossed her face, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. Then you already understand what I'm about to tell you. What you're holding is evidence of elder financial exploitation, forgery, identity theft, and potentially wire fraud. These are serious criminal offenses, and they were committed by someone inside your family. Hearing it stated so plainly, so clinically, made the room feel smaller. I had known it since the moment I saw Megan's name on the LLC filing. But knowing something in the quiet of your living room at 3 in the morning is different from hearing a lawyer confirm it under fluorescent lights with a legal pad open in front of her. The person who did this, I said slowly, is my daughter-in-law. Vance studied me for a moment. And your son? I don't know how much he knows. I searched for the right word. He's under her control. He has been, for years. I don't think he's involved in the forgery. But I can't be certain, Vance nodded, writing something on her pad. We'll determine that as the case develops. For now, we focus on what we can prove. And what you've brought me is substantial. She outlined the next steps with a clarity that made the impossible feel manageable. Filing a formal complaint with the county. Requesting a forensic review of the HELOC origination. Issuing preservation notices to the bank and the LLC. Preparing a civil petition and coordinating with the district attorney's office for potential criminal referral. This will move quickly once we file, she said. But I need you to understand something, Walter. People who commit this kind of fraud, especially within families, rarely go quietly when they're exposed. She will push back. She may try to discredit you. She may try to isolate you further. She leaned forward slightly. Be careful around her. And document everything from this point forward. Every conversation, every text, every visit. I signed the retainer agreement. My hand was steady. The pen moved the way it always had. Small, precise, deliberate. My signature, not someone else's imitation of it. As I stood to leave, Vance said one more thing. Mr. Grayson, I want to be clear about something. What you're doing, standing up for yourself, pursuing legal action against family, this isn't an act of betrayal. It's an act of self-preservation. Protecting yourself isn't destroying your family. It's preventing someone else from destroying you. Her words settled over me with a weight that felt less like burden and more like armor. I thanked her, tucked the folder under my arm, and stepped back into the Portland morning. The sky was its usual gray, low clouds, stretched across the city like a ceiling that never quite lifts. But as I walked toward my car, something about the grayness felt different. It didn't press down on me the way it had for days. It felt like cover, like concealment. Like the city itself was wrapping a quiet shield around me while I prepared for what came next. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and my mind already running the next column of numbers. The case was open. The evidence was filed. And for the first time since that door closed on Christmas Eve, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again. Not hope exactly. Something sturdier than hope. Something closer to certainty. I didn't plan on going near Derek's house again. The route home from Vance's office didn't require it. Spokane Street and Bybee Boulevard sit on different sides of the neighborhood, connected by streets I could easily avoid. But grief has a way of pulling you toward the places that hurt the most, as if your body needs to revisit the wound one more time before it can begin to heal. Or maybe it wasn't grief at all. Maybe it was the accountant in me. Still gathering data, still chasing a number that hadn't been accounted for. Whatever the reason, I turned onto Bybee Boulevard that afternoon without fully deciding to. The sky was flat and white. The kind of overcast Portland sky that erases shadows and makes everything look like a photograph drained of contrast. I slowed as I neared their house, pulling to the curb 2 houses down, cutting the engine. I didn't go to the door. I sat in the car, hands on the wheel, staring at the home I had helped save. The foundation I had paid to repair. The porch where I had been told I wasn't welcome. The windows that had glowed so warmly on Christmas Eve while I stood outside in the cold holding a pie no one wanted. I should have driven away. But then I heard her voice. Megan was on the back deck, partially hidden by the fence line, talking on her phone. The cold air carried sound with a clarity that summer never allows, and her words drifted across the yard, through the cracked window of my car, and into my chest like shards of glass. "The old man's house is worth at least $400,000 now," she said. Her tone was casual, confident, the way someone discusses numbers they've already spent in their mind. "The whole neighborhood is exploding. 3 houses on his block sold above asking last fall. Once we get him into a facility, Derek will sign whatever I put in front of him. He's too soft to say no." She laughed. A short, sharp sound. The kind that turns amusement into a weapon. "I already have the paperwork started," she continued. "It's just a matter of timing. We push the competency angle, get him evaluated. And once the court agrees he can't manage his own affairs, the house is ours. Well, Derek's on paper, but we both know who handles the money." I sat frozen. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and a vein pulsed at my temple that I hadn't felt in years. $400,000. That was the number she had assigned to my home. Not the house where Dorothy and I built a life. Not the place where I planned to spend my remaining years. A number. An asset. A piece of a plan she had been constructing long before Christmas. Facility. Competency angle. Court. Paperwork, already started. This wasn't a woman who had impulsively forged a signature to cover a bad investment. This was someone who had been thinking 3 moves ahead, positioning her pieces with the patience of someone who believed the game was already won. I turned the key. The engine caught, and I pulled away from the curb without looking back. My jaw clenched so hard, my teeth ached. The drive home took less than 10 minutes. But by the time I walked through my front door, the grief and shock that had carried me through the past 2 days had burned away entirely. What replaced them was something colder, something sharper. A focus so clear, it felt almost mechanical. The accountant wasn't just awake anymore. He was working. I sat down at my desk, opened the laptop, and typed the name I already knew into the Oregon Secretary of State's business search. Westbrook Properties, LLC. The filing pulled up immediately. I had seen it the night before Megan's name, the registration date, the business type. But this time I went deeper. The LLC's registered address matched a P.O. box in southeast Portland. Its formation documents listed Megan as the sole managing member with full authority over financial operations. And attached to the filing was a list of assumed business names, a common practice for LLCs that operate under multiple identities. 2 names were listed: Westbrook Properties and Ridgemont Foundation Services. I stared at the screen. Ridgemont. The company on the invoice. The company that didn't exist when I searched for it as a standalone business. It existed, after all, not as a real company, but as a ghost name registered under Megan's LLC, a shell within a shell. She had created a fake contractor, invoiced me $30,000 for work that may or may not have been done, pocketed the money through her own company, and then used my identity to borrow another $52,000 against my house to cover the losses she was already drowning in. I pulled up the property records next. Westbrook Properties had acquired 3 residential properties over the past 14 months, a duplex in Gresham, a small house in Milwaukee, and a fixer-upper in outer southeast. Each one purchased with the confidence of someone who believed the Portland real estate market would keep climbing forever. It hadn't. All 3 properties had declined in value since purchase. The duplex had a lien against it, from an unpaid contractor. The Milwaukee house sat vacant, accumulating code violations. The fixer-upper had been listed for sale at a loss 3 months ago, and pulled off the market when no offers materialized. I opened a new spreadsheet. My fingers moved with the automatic precision of 4 decades of practice. Column headers, date ranges, source codes, Transaction references. I mapped every dollar. The $30,000 from my savings, wired to Derek, redirected to Westbrook. The $52,000 from the HELOC, transferred in one lump sum to the same LLC. Outflows to the 3 properties' down payments. Closing costs. Renovation deposits. Losses accumulating quarter by quarter. Debt compounding across multiple creditors. By the time I finished, the spreadsheet contained 47 rows and 12 columns. Every number sourced. Every transaction verified. Every lie reduced to a cell in a grid that left no room for interpretation. I leaned back and stared at the final column: net loss. The number sat at the bottom of the screen in bold red, patient and absolute, the way only numbers can be. It was the cleanest forensic audit I had ever performed. And the ugliest. Dorothy once told me that numbers were the most honest language in the world. She said they didn't play favorites, didn't soften the truth, didn't care whether you wanted to hear what they had to say. She was right. And tonight, they told me everything. I saved the file, printed 2 copies, and placed them in the folder beside the forged signature and the LLC filings. Then I closed the laptop, pressed my palms flat on the desk, and sat in the silence of my living room while the Portland rain tapped against the windows. In 40 years of accounting, I had never built a case against anyone. I had audited companies, corrected errors, flagged discrepancies, and helped clients navigate the IRS. But I had never assembled a body of evidence designed to prove that someone I loved had systematically stolen from me. I had never needed to. Until now. The next morning I did something I hadn't done since Dorothy's funeral. I cleaned the house. Not a surface wipe or a quick sweep, I mean a real cleaning. The kind where you pull everything out of closets, open drawers you haven't touched in years, and force yourself to look at what's been accumulating in the spaces you stopped paying attention to. It started in the hallway closet. 3 winter coats I never wore. A box of Dorothy's scarves I had kept because throwing them away felt like throwing away part of her. A stack of manila envelopes filled with tax records from decades ago, returns I had filed for clients who had probably forgotten my name by now. I sorted through all of it, keeping what mattered, discarding what didn't. And feeling with each bag I filled something lighten inside me that had nothing to do with physical weight. I moved to the living room next. Old magazines Dorothy used to read. A broken clock I had meant to fix 3 years ago. Stacks of mail I had opened, glanced at, and placed on the side table as though they would somehow organize themselves. I cleared the surfaces, wiped the shelves, and opened the curtains wide enough to let the gray Portland light flood the room in a way it hadn't in months. Clearing the space felt like clearing my mind. Each object removed was a small act of reclamation, proof that I could still decide what belonged in my life and what didn't. That the man who had stood on a frozen porch holding a rejected pie was not the man standing in this room now. Then I found the will. It was in the bottom drawer of the desk, tucked beneath the insurance papers and the deed to the house. A simple document, 4 pages, drafted by an attorney 3 years ago and signed in my steady hand. I hadn't looked at it since the day I filed it. There had been no reason to. I had known exactly what it said. I sat down in the recliner and opened it. The language was plain. I had left everything to Derek: the house, my savings, my pension benefits, and a short list of personal items that included Dorothy's jewelry, our wedding album, and the ceramic pie dish. At the bottom of the final page, beneath my signature, I had written a brief note in my own handwriting. I trust my son Derek to carry forward our family's legacy with the same love and integrity that Dorothy and I built it on. I read the sentence 3 times. Each reading felt like swallowing a stone. The words had been true when I wrote them. They had been written with the confidence of a father who believed his son would honor the life his parents had lived. That confidence was gone now, not destroyed by Derek alone, but hollowed out by the silence he had chosen and the woman he had allowed to speak for him. I tore the will in half, then in quarters. Then I carried the pieces to the kitchen trash can and dropped them in without ceremony. The new will took me the rest of the morning. I wrote it at the kitchen table in longhand first, the way Dorothy would have approved pen to paper. Every word deliberate. Sophie and Mason would receive everything through a trust, managed by a court-appointed trustee, until they turned 25. A portion would go to the Selwood Community Library, where I had volunteered for years. The house would be maintained through the trust, preserved as a home rather than sold as an asset. Derek and Megan were excluded entirely. I wrote their names under the section labeled "Individuals expressly excluded from this estate." My hand didn't shake. My pen didn't hesitate. But something deep in my chest ached as the ink dried, the kind of ache that comes not from anger but from the death of a hope you carried longer than you should have. Sophie's name I wrote first. Sophie Ann Grayson. I pictured her standing on the staircase on Christmas Eve, blue pencil in her hand, eyes too old for her face. Whatever happened next, she would be protected. That was the one number in this entire ledger that I refused to let anyone alter. That afternoon I drove back to Vance's office. She was expecting me. I handed her the forensic spreadsheet, the LLC property records, and the connection between Ridgemont Foundation Services and Westbrook Properties. She reviewed each document with the same meticulous care as before, occasionally nodding, once raising an eyebrow at the assumed business name discovery. "This is remarkably thorough, Walter," she said. "You've mapped the entire financial structure. Most forensic accountants I hire don't deliver work this clean." "Most forensic accountants didn't have their identity stolen by their daughter-in-law," I replied. She almost smiled. Almost. Then she opened a new file on her desk and slid a form across to me. "We're ready to file. The summons will go out within 48 hours. Once it's served, the clock starts." I signed where she indicated. 2 forms, 3 initials, a process that would set in motion something I could never take back. "Walter," she said, as I stood to leave. "Once she's served, expect a reaction. It may come fast." I nodded. I had already heard what Megan sounded like when she was scheming in comfort. I could only imagine what she sounded like when the ground shifted beneath her. I didn't have to imagine for long. 2 days later, just after dusk, I stepped onto my porch to bring in the recycling bin. The rain had stopped, and the air was cold and still, the kind of stillness Portland gets when the clouds are too heavy to move and the city holds its breath beneath them. Then I heard it. Distant, but unmistakable. A scream, sharp, ragged, furious, rising from the direction of Bybee Boulevard and cutting through the evening air like something torn from a person who had just discovered the world no longer bent to their will. I stood on the porch, hands at my sides, listening as the sound faded into the wet streets and the gathering dark. I felt no guilt, no satisfaction either. Just a quiet, bone-deep awareness that the numbers had finally spoken loud enough for someone else to hear. Megan had received the summons, and the silence I had kept for too long was officially over. She came to my door the way a wildfire comes to a house, fast, bright, and pretending to be warmth. It was 2 evenings after the summons went out. I had spent the day quietly organizing the last of the documents Vance had requested, rereading the forensic spreadsheet one final time, and sitting in the recliner with a cup of tea that grew cold while my mind ran calculations I didn't need a computer for. The house was still. The rain had paused, and then headlights swept across my front windows, followed by the sharp clack of heels on the walkway. I didn't need to look. The knock came hard and quick, 3 rapid strikes that carried no courtesy, only demand. I set down my tea, stood slowly, and opened the door. Megan stood on my porch in a cream-colored coat, her hair smoothed back. A smile stretched across her face, like a bandage over a wound she was trying to hide. She held a bottle of wine in one hand and her car keys in the other. And everything about her posture, the tilted head, the soft shoulders, the slightly parted lips, had been calibrated to project warmth. "Walter," she said brightly. Too brightly. "Hi. I thought we should talk." She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped past me into the entryway, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, with the confidence of someone who believed every room she entered belonged to her. I closed the door behind her, more out of habit than hospitality, and followed her into the living room. She She scanned the space the way a buyer scans a property, appraising surfaces, measuring dimensions, cataloging value. Her eyes lingered on the bookshelves, the fireplace mantel, the large window facing the street. 400,000. That was the number she had attached to these walls. I could almost see her calculating it in real time. Then she sat down. In Dorothy's chair, the wingback by the window where my wife used to read her novels every evening, where she would tuck her feet beneath her and balance a mug of chamomile on the armrest, where the fabric still held the faint impression of her shape, if you knew where to look. Megan settled into it as though it were any other piece of furniture, crossing her legs and placing the wine bottle on the side table with a soft clink. Something tightened in my chest. Not anger. Something older than anger. Something that lived in the part of me that still set 2 mugs out in the morning before remembering I only needed one. Look. Megan began, clasping her hands together as if preparing to deliver a speech she had rehearsed in the car. I think we all got a little emotional, okay? The holidays are stressful. People say things they don't mean. This whole court thing, she waved her hand as if swatting a fly. It's just unnecessary. We're family, Walter. We can work this out over a conversation. I didn't respond. I stood near the hallway entrance, hands at my sides, watching her the way I used to watch a column of numbers that I knew contained an error but hadn't yet located. My silence unsettled her. I could see it in the way her smile thinned at the edges, the way her fingers pressed together a fraction harder. She was accustomed to filling rooms with her voice, to steering conversations the way she steered Derek with confidence and the assumption that resistance was temporary. Walter, I know you've been upset, she continued, her tone sliding into the gentle condescension of someone explaining something simple to someone slow. And I understand. You've been through a lot. Losing Dorothy. Being alone. It's natural to feel confused. To misinterpret things. I'm not confused, Megan. The words came out quieter than I intended, but they landed with enough weight to stop her mid-sentence. Her mouth hung open for a half-second before she recovered, adjusting her expression the way someone adjusts a mask that has slipped. Of course not, she said quickly. I didn't mean, you came here to convince me to drop the case, I said. So let me save you the performance. The mask slipped further. Something flickered behind her eyes, not fear, not yet, but the first recognition that the man standing in front of her was not the same man she had pushed out into the snow. I turned, walked to the coffee table where the documents sat in a neat stack, and picked up the HELOC signature page. I carried it back and placed it on the side table beside her wine bottle. Do you recognize this? I asked. She glanced down. The color drained from her face in a slow tide, starting at her forehead and pulling downward until her lips went pale. She didn't touch it. She stared at it the way you stare at something you buried and never expected to see again. I returned to the table and came back with the LLC filing. Then the forensic spreadsheet. Then the property records for the 3 failed investments. I placed each one beside the last, building a wall of paper between us that grew with every trip. Westbrook Properties, I said, standing over the documents. Your company, registered in your name 8 months ago, funded with $52,000 borrowed against my house using a signature I never wrote. I pointed to the invoice. Ridgemont Foundation Services. Not a real company. An assumed business name filed under your LLC. You invoiced me $30,000 for repairs that may never have happened, funneled the money through a ghost contractor you created, and used it to cover down payments on properties that have since lost a combined value of, stop, she whispered, roughly $200,000. I finished. The room was silent except for the rain starting again outside, tapping against the window behind Dorothy's chair where Megan sat frozen. Her mask gone entirely, replaced by the raw face of someone watching their carefully constructed world crack down the center. You don't understand, she said suddenly, her voice sharpening. It was an investment. For the family. The market was turning. I had projections. I had a plan. I had a plan. It was brained. In non-man. And non-dumb. Your plan cost me my identity, Megan. It cost me $52,000 in debt I didn't authorize. It put my home, the home I built with Dorothy, at risk, and you covered it with a forged signature and a fake company because you were too afraid to admit you had failed. She stood abruptly, the wine bottle wobbling on the table. Her eyes darted between the papers and me, wild now, calculating, searching for a door that wasn't there. I'll make sure you never see Sophie and Mason again, she said, her voice dropping to a trembling hiss. I'll tell the court you're unstable. I'll tell them you threaten me. A sound stopped her. The front door opening. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Heavy. Familiar. Derek appeared in the living room doorway. He stood motionless, one hand braced against the wall as though he needed it to remain upright. His face was white. His eyes moved from Megan to the papers spread across the table, then to me. He had heard everything. Maybe not every word, but enough. More than enough. Megan reached for his arm. Derek, I can explain. He stepped back. One step. Small. Instinctive. The kind of step a person takes when they realize the ground beneath them is no longer solid, and the distance between them in that single step felt like something that would never fully close again. Derek stood in the hallway like a man caught between two fires. His hand still rested on the doorframe, and his eyes moved from the papers on the table to Megan, then to me, and back to the papers again. He did not speak. He did not need to. The silence said everything his mouth could not. Megan recovered first. She always did. Derek, your father is confused, she said. Her voice steady, warm, rehearsed. He found some old paperwork, and he's drawn the wrong conclusions. You know how he gets. He sees patterns where there aren't any. I watched my son's face. 40 years old, and he still looked like the boy who used to hide behind Dorothy's legs during thunderstorms. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled against the wood. He was afraid. And I understood that fear, because I had lived inside it for months. But understanding it did not make it easier to witness. Derek, I said quietly. Sit down. He looked at Megan. She gave the smallest shake of her head. A motion so slight that most people would have missed it. But I had spent 40 years reading micro-expressions across conference tables, watching executives flinch when the audit numbers hit the screen. I saw it. And I saw him obey it. Dad, maybe we should talk about this another time, Derek said. There is no other time, I replied. Sit down. Please. Something in my voice must have reached whatever part of him still remembered who he was before Megan, because he crossed the room and sat in the wooden chair beside the bookcase. Dorothy's chair was still occupied by his wife. The symbolism was not lost on me. I spread the documents between them. The HELOC agreement, the LLC filing, the forensic spreadsheet, the Ridgemont Foundation Services invoice, the signature comparison I had printed at the library, my real signature beside the forgery, side by side like two people who look alike but are not the same person at all. I am going to explain this one more time, I said. Not because Megan deserves the explanation, because you do. I walked through every line. The $30,000 I wired in July for foundation repairs that never happened. The $52,000 home equity line of credit opened in my name, with a signature that is not mine, at an address that is mine. The money routed to Westbrook Properties LLC, a company registered 8 months ago, with Megan Grayson listed as sole managing member. The 3 investment properties purchased and lost. The assumed business name connecting Westbrook to Ridgemont. Every number, every date, every lie, laid out in rows and columns the way I had laid out numbers for 4 decades. Derek listened. His breathing changed. It grew shallow, then stopped, then came back, in a long, unsteady exhale that fogged the air between us. That's not Megan started. Be quiet. Derek said. The room went still. I had not heard my son speak to his wife that way in the entire 12 years of their marriage. Megan's mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers pressed into the arm of Dorothy's chair, hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Dad, Derek said. His voice cracked on the single syllable. I need to tell you something. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. It was creased, worn at the edges, as though it had been carried for weeks, taken out and put back, taken out and put back. A decision made and unmade dozens of times. He placed it on the table beside my spreadsheet. She asked me to sign these, he said. Last September. She told me they were refinancing documents for our house. Standard forms. She said I didn't need to read them because the loan officer had already explained everything. I opened the envelope. Inside were 2 pages. The first was a power of attorney form, granting Megan authority to act on my behalf in financial matters. The second was a consent form for the HELOC application, bearing a signature line for a family member to verify the borrower's identity. Derek's signature was on both. I didn't read them, he whispered. She said it was routine. She said you knew. Megan stood up. The warmth was gone. The wine and keys persona had evaporated like water on a hot pan. You are making a mistake, Derek, she said. And her voice carried a new edge, thin and metallic. Everything I did was for this family. The investments were supposed to pay off. We were supposed to double the money and pay Walter back before he even noticed. Before I noticed, I repeated. It was a calculated risk, she said. You used a fake company to invoice me for repairs that never happened, I said. You forged my signature on a $52,000 loan against my house. You routed the funds through an LLC that you created and controlled. You purchased 3 properties that lost money. And when the numbers fell apart, you planned to have me declared incompetent and sell my home for $400,000 to cover the debt. That is not a calculated risk, Megan. That is fraud. She grabbed her coat from the back of the chair. I will not stand here and be accused by a man who doesn't understand how the real world works. The real world, I said, is the one where numbers do not lie. And your numbers, Megan, tell a very clear story. She looked at Derek one last time. If you stay here, don't bother coming home tonight. The front door closed behind her. Not a slam. A precise, controlled click. That was worse. Derek sat with his head in his hands. The envelope lay open between us. The fire had burned low, and the room smelled of ash and cold air. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. I should have read them. I should have asked questions. You should have trusted your own eyes instead of her voice, I said. But you are here now. That matters. He looked up. His eyes were red, wet, and full of something I had not seen in them for years. Shame, yes, but also clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when a person finally stops pretending. What do we do now? He asked. I placed my hand on the envelope. We give these to Patricia Vance. And then we wait. Outside, the snow had stopped. The street lamp cast a pale circle on the sidewalk, and somewhere down Bybee Boulevard, a car engine started and pulled away into the dark. The morning after the confrontation, I woke to a knock so soft I almost mistook it for the wind. It came again, 3 light taps, patient and deliberate. The knock of someone who had been taught to be quiet in a loud house. I opened the door and found Sophie standing on the porch in her red winter coat, a backpack hanging from one shoulder. Her breath made small clouds in the January air. Behind her, the street was empty. No car. No adult. A 10-year-old girl had walked 6 blocks through the cold to reach my house alone. Grandpa, she said. Can I come in? I stepped aside without a word. She walked past me, slipped off her shoes the way Dorothy had always insisted, and sat at the kitchen table as though she had done it 1,000 times. She had not been inside this house in almost 4 months. I made her hot chocolate. Not the powdered kind. The real kind, with whole milk heated slowly on the stove, 2 tablespoons of cocoa, a pinch of cinnamon, the way Dorothy used to make it on Saturday mornings when Derek was small and the world outside was nothing but rain and possibility. Sophie wrapped both hands around the mug and drank without speaking. I sat across from her and waited. 40 years of auditing had taught me that silence is the most powerful question you can ask. People fill it with whatever they have been holding. Sophie unzipped her backpack and pulled out a blue folder. It was the kind schools give children for homework, with 2 inside pockets and a metal clasp. She placed it on the table between us and pushed it forward with both hands, the way a witness might slide evidence across a courtroom desk. "I drew these," she said. "I've been drawing them since September." I opened the folder. Inside were 14 sheets of paper, each one a colored pencil drawing rendered with the careful, unsteady precision of a child who is trying very hard to tell the truth in the only language she trusts. The first drawing showed a tall woman with dark hair standing over a seated man with gray hair. The tall woman's mouth was open. Red lines radiated from her head like heat. The gray-haired man's eyes were closed, and his hands were flat on a table covered with papers. Beneath the image, in Sophie's round handwriting, were the words, "Mommy yelling at Grandpa about money." The second drawing showed the same woman sitting at a computer at night. The screen was bright green. Around her feet were crumpled papers, and on the desk was a stack of envelopes. The caption read, "Mommy on the computer late. Daddy sleeping." I turned each page slowly. The third showed a man and a woman arguing in a kitchen, the woman pointing at a phone, the man looking at the floor. "Mommy says Grandpa is too old to live alone." The fourth showed a little girl sitting on a staircase, knees drawn up, watching through the banister rails. Me listening. The fifth was a house with a large dollar sign drawn on the roof and an arrow pointing away from it. "Mommy says we can sell Grandpa's house." My hands were steady. They had to be. I was an accountant. I had held spreadsheets that revealed million-dollar fraud and kept my fingers still. But these were not spreadsheets. These were the observations of a child who had been watching, recording, and remembering every word spoken when the adults believed she was asleep or playing or too young to understand. The sixth drawing showed the tall woman handing a piece of paper to the seated man. His hand was being guided by hers. The caption said, "Mommy helping Daddy sign papers." Daddy didn't read them. I recognized the moment. Derek's envelope, the power of attorney form, the HELOC consent. My granddaughter had witnessed it. I continued. A drawing of a phone call where the woman whispered and the child hid behind a door. A drawing of a locked filing cabinet with a red X over it. A drawing of Christmas Eve. The front door closed. A gray-haired man standing outside, holding something round, a pie, and a small face in the upstairs window looking down. Beneath it, Sophie had written, "Grandpa came. Mommy said no." The 13th drawing was different. It showed the gray-haired man sitting alone at a table. Around him, the room was empty. No family, no food, no tree, just walls and a single lamp. The caption read, "Grandpa alone on Christmas." I set the folder down. My throat felt like it had been pressed shut by something heavy and warm. "Sophie," I said, "why did you draw these?" She looked at me with eyes that were too old for her face, the same hazel as Dorothy's, the same quiet steadiness. "Because Mommy says things that aren't true," she said, "and I can't write fast enough to remember all the words. But I can draw what I see. Mrs. Patterson says art is a way to show what's real." Mrs. Patterson, her art teacher, the one who had encouraged her to keep a sketchbook. I made a silent note to thank that woman someday. "Can I keep these?" I asked. "That's why I brought them," Sophie said. "I made copies at the school library. I used the color copier. It cost 10 cents a page, so I used my lunch money for 2 days." She said it plainly, without drama, without self-pity. A 10-year-old girl had skipped lunch twice to photocopy evidence of her mother's fraud because she understood, in a way that children sometimes understand before adults do, that the truth has to be preserved before someone destroys it. I placed the folder beside Derek's envelope and my forensic spreadsheet. 3 sources. 3 kinds of evidence. Numbers, documents, and a child's art. Together they formed something that no courtroom could easily ignore. "Thank you, Sophie," I said. She finished her hot chocolate, set the mug down gently, and said, "Grandpa, can I stay here today? I don't want to go home yet." "You can stay as long as you need," I said, and I meant it for both of us. The Multnomah County Courthouse sits on Southwest 4th Avenue like a man who has seen every kind of human failure and decided long ago to stop being surprised. I had driven past it hundreds of times over the years, on my way to client meetings or lunch with Dorothy at the Vietnamese place on 3rd. I had never been inside. I had never needed to be. On the morning of February 11th, I needed to be. Patricia Vance met me on the steps at 8:15. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a single leather briefcase that looked like it had survived more courtrooms than most attorneys. She studied my face the way she studied documents, looking for weakness, inconsistency, doubt. "How did you sleep?" she asked. "I didn't." "Good," she said. "Honest people don't sleep before hearings. Liars sleep fine." We entered through the main doors, passed through security, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. The hallway smelled of floor polish and old radiators. Our hearing was in courtroom 4B, a mid-sized room with oak paneling that had darkened with decades of testimony. The judge's bench sat elevated at the front, flanked by the American flag and the Oregon state flag. 12 rows of gallery seating stretched behind a low partition. The lights hummed a faint electrical note, the kind of sound you only hear when you are trying not to hear your own heartbeat. I sat beside Vance at the petitioner's table on the left. She arranged the case file in front of her with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. 5 tabbed sections, 47 exhibits, 3 witness statements, 1 forensic spreadsheet, 1 blue folder full of a child's drawings. Across the aisle, Megan sat with her attorney, a tall man in a Navy suit whose name I later learned was Richard Kelly. He had a reputation for aggressive cross-examination and a billable rate that made me wonder how Megan was paying him or whose money she was using. She wore a cream blouse and pearl earrings, and her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look composed, professional, and entirely trustworthy. She did not look at me. She looked straight ahead, as though I were not in the room, as though I had never been in any room she occupied. Derek sat in the second row of the gallery, alone. He wore the same jacket he had worn the night he handed me the envelope. His hands were clasped between his knees, and his head was slightly bowed, the posture of a man preparing to hear things he already knew but had never admitted out loud. Ruth Bellamy sat 3 seats behind Derek. She had insisted on coming. 30 years of nursing taught me one thing, she had said the night before. People heal faster when someone is watching who cares. The bailiff announced the Honorable Judge Catherine Moreau. She entered from the side door, a woman in her early 60s with short silver hair and reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. She moved with the calm authority of a person who had spent her career separating truth from performance. She sat, arranged her papers, and looked at both tables over the rim of her glasses. "This is the matter of Grayson versus Grayson," she said. "Petition for financial restitution, declaratory relief, and protective order in the context of alleged elder financial exploitation. Miss Vance, you may begin your opening statement." Vance stood. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. She spoke the way good attorneys speak, with the understanding that facts, properly ordered, carry more force than emotion. "Your Honor, this case concerns the systematic financial exploitation of a 71-year-old retired certified public accountant by his daughter-in-law, Megan Grayson. Over a period of approximately 8 months, the respondent created a fictitious company, Ridgemont Foundation Services, operating under a limited liability company she solely owns called Westbrook Properties LLC. and used it to invoice the petitioner for $30,000 in home foundation repairs that were never performed. She paused. Judge Moreau's pen moved across her notepad. The respondent then opened a home equity line of credit in the amount of $52,000 against the petitioner's home, located on Southeast Spokane Street in the Selwood Moreland neighborhood of Portland. The application bears a forged signature. The petitioner did not authorize, consent to, or have knowledge of this loan. The funds were transferred to Westbrook Properties, LLC, and used to purchase 3 investment properties, all of which have since depreciated or been encumbered by liens, resulting in a net loss. Vance placed her hand on the case file. The petitioner will present documentary evidence, including the fraudulent invoice, the forged HELOC application, signature analysis, LLC registration records, bank transfer records, a forensic accounting spreadsheet prepared by the petitioner himself, corroborating witness testimony, and a series of observational drawings created by the petitioner's 10-year-old granddaughter, who independently documented the respondent's behavior over a period of 5 months. A small sound came from the gallery. I did not turn to look, but I knew it was Derek, releasing a breath he had held for too long. Your Honor, this is not a family disagreement about money, Vance continued. This is a case of elder financial abuse, identity theft, and forgery. The petitioner is not seeking sympathy. He is seeking accountability, and the evidence will show, clearly and without ambiguity, that Megan Grayson orchestrated a deliberate scheme to defraud a member of her own family. Vance sat down. The courtroom was quiet. Judge Moreau finished writing, set her pen down, and looked at the respondent's table. Mr. Kelly, your opening statement. Richard Kelly rose with the smooth confidence of a man who believed preparation could overcome truth. He buttoned his jacket, squared his shoulders to the bench, and began. Your Honor, what you will hear today is a story built on misunderstanding, grief, and a well-meaning family investment that simply did not perform as expected. I folded my hands on the table. Beside me, Vance's pen was already moving, noting every word, every claim, every thread she intended to pull apart. The room waited. Richard Kelly spoke for 9 minutes. I know because I counted. Counting is what I do when the world becomes unreliable. Numbers hold still. People do not. His argument was simple, well-constructed, and almost convincing. He described Megan as a devoted mother and wife who had taken on the burden of managing family finances after Walter's wife passed away. He characterized the $30,000 payment as a voluntary gift, not a loan, made by a grieving father-in-law who wanted to help his son's family. He described the HELOC as a joint family decision made with Walter's verbal consent, the paperwork being a formality handled by Megan to spare Walter the stress. He described Westbrook Properties, LLC, as a family investment vehicle, well-intentioned but unfortunate in its timing. He used the word family 11 times. I counted that too. When he finished, Judge Moreau removed her glasses and looked at Vance. Miss Vance, you may call your first witness. Vance stood. The petitioner calls Walter Grayson. I rose, walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The leather was warm from the courtroom lights. I sat down and faced the room. Derek's eyes met mine for half a second before he looked away. Vance began with the foundation. Not the house foundation. My foundation. Who I was. 71 years old. Retired, certified public accountant. 41 years of practice. Widowed 5 years. Homeowner on Southeast Spokane Street. Since 1982. 1 son. 2 grandchildren. A life built on precision, responsibility, and trust. Then she moved to the money. Mr. Grayson, in July of last year, did you transfer $30,000 to an entity called Ridgemont Foundation Services? I did. What was the stated purpose of that transfer? My son Derek called me and said the foundation of his house needed emergency repair. He said his contractor, Ridgemont Foundation Services, required payment up front. I wired the money the same day. Did you verify the existence of Ridgemont Foundation Services at the time? No. My son asked for help. I trusted him. The courtroom absorbed that sentence. Trust. The most expensive word in the English language. Vance introduced Exhibit A, the invoice from Ridgemont Foundation Services. She pointed to the employer identification number 823457691, which lacked the required hyphen format used by the Internal Revenue Service. She introduced Exhibit B, a printout from the Oregon Secretary of State's Business Registry showing no entity named Ridgemont Foundation Services had ever been registered in the state. She introduced Exhibit C, the registration filing for Westbrook Properties LLC, listing Megan Grayson as sole managing member, with an assumed business name filing connecting Westbrook to Ridgemont. Mr. Grayson, did you know that Ridgemont Foundation Services was a fictitious name operated by your daughter-in-law's company? I did not. I discovered this connection in late December during my own investigation. Kelly objected. Your Honor, the petitioner is not a licensed investigator. Judge Moreau looked at him over her glasses. He is a certified public accountant with 4 decades of forensic auditing experience. Overruled. Vance moved to the HELOC. She introduced Exhibit D, the home equity line of credit application for $52,000. Opened against my home. She placed it on the overhead projector so the courtroom could see the signature page. Mr. Grayson, is that your signature? It is not. How can you be certain? 3 reasons. First, I sign my surname with a descending loop on the capital G that ends below the baseline. The signature on this document loops upward. Second, I have signed my name the same way since 1978, when my penmanship instructor at Portland State, Dr. Eleanor Hines, corrected my letter formation. The muscle memory is permanent. Third, on the date this application was submitted, August 14th, I was in Bend, Oregon, attending a 2-day reunion of my college accounting fraternity. I have hotel receipts, a conference photograph, and the testimony of 6 former colleagues who were present. The courtroom was quiet. Kelly's pen had stopped moving. Vance introduced Exhibits E through H. The bank transfer records showing $52,000 moving from the HELOC into Westbrook Properties LLC's operating account. The property purchase records for 3 addresses: a duplex in Gresham with an outstanding lien, a vacant house in Milwaukee with code violations, and a Southeast Portland fixer-upper sold at a $14,000 loss. The forensic spreadsheet I had prepared, 47 rows and 12 columns, mapping every dollar from origin to destination, with a net loss figure circled in red. Mr. Grayson, what is the total amount of money that was taken from you or borrowed against your assets without your knowledge or consent? $82,000, I said. $30,000 in the fraudulent invoice. $52,000 in the forged HELOC. Vance let the number sit. She understood, as I did, that numbers need silence around them to be heard properly. They need space to land. One more question, Mr. Grayson. Did Megan Grayson ever inform you, consult you, or request your permission regarding any of these transactions? She did not. Did your son Derek inform you? He did not. He has since provided a sworn statement indicating that he signed power of attorney and HELOC consent forms without reading them, at Megan's instruction, believing they were refinancing documents for his own home. Derek's head dropped in the gallery. Ruth placed her hand on the seat beside her, close to his arm but not touching it. A nurse's instinct. Comfort offered without intrusion. No further questions, Your Honor, Vance said. Judge Moreau made a note. Then she turned to the respondent's table. Mr. Kelly, your cross-examination. Kelly stood slowly. He adjusted his cufflinks, a gesture I recognized from decades of watching men buy time before difficult conversations. He looked at me the way a chess player looks at a board when the opening has not gone according to plan. "Mr. Grayson," he began, "you describe yourself as a meticulous man." "I describe myself as an accountant," I said. "The meticulousness comes with the profession." A soft sound rippled through the gallery. Not laughter. Recognition. Kelly's jaw tightened, and he pressed forward. Kelly approached the witness stand the way a surgeon approaches a table when he already knows the patient is stronger than expected. Careful steps, measured breathing. Every word chosen not for truth but for angle. "Mr. Grayson, you testified that you transferred $30,000 to Ridgemont Foundation Services in July of last year. Correct?" "Correct. And you made that transfer willingly, without coercion, based on a phone call from your son, based on my son's request for help." "Yes. So no one forced you to send that money. No one held a gun to my head, Mr. Kelly. But deception is its own form of force. When your son tells you his house is falling apart and he needs help, you do not ask for a second opinion. You wire the money." Kelly shifted tactics. He produced a single sheet of paper and asked the court's permission to introduce it as Respondent's Exhibit 1. Judge Moreau nodded. He placed it on the overhead projector. It was a letter. Handwritten. Addressed to Derek and Megan. The handwriting was feminine, slightly slanted, with rounded vowels and tall consonants. At the bottom was a signature, Dorothy Grayson. My chest tightened. "Mr. Grayson, do you recognize this letter?" I looked at it. The paper was cream-colored, the kind Dorothy used for personal correspondence. The ink was blue, her preferred color. The phrasing was warm, affectionate, and specific. It read, "Dear Derek and Megan, Walter and I have always considered you part of our home. Whatever we have is yours. If you ever need help with the house or finances, please consider anything we give as a gift, not a loan. We want you to build your future without the weight of debt. With love, Dorothy." "Mr. Grayson," Kelly repeated. "Do you recognize this letter?" "I recognize the paper," I said. "I recognize an imitation of my wife's handwriting. But I do not recognize this letter, because my wife did not write it." A murmur crossed the gallery. Kelly raised an eyebrow. "That is a serious accusation, Mr. Grayson. How can you be certain your late wife did not write this letter?" Vance was already on her feet, but I answered before she could object. "3 reasons, Mr. Kelly. First, Dorothy always dated her letters. Every letter she wrote in 43 years of marriage carried a date in the upper right corner. This letter has no date. Second, Dorothy never used the phrase, "the weight of debt." She considered it melodramatic. Her word was obligation. I heard her say it 1,000 times. Third, and most importantly, Dorothy passed away in January, 5 years ago. Megan married Derek 7 months later. In August of that same year, Dorothy met Megan exactly twice, both times briefly. At family gatherings where they exchanged polite conversation and nothing more. My wife would not have written a letter of this intimacy to a woman she barely knew. The courtroom went silent. Not the polite silence of attention. The deep silence of something breaking open. Judge Moreau turned to Kelly. "Mr. Kelly, does the respondent have provenance for this letter? A postmark? An envelope? A witness who saw it written or received?" Kelly hesitated. 1 second. 2 seconds. In a courtroom, 2 seconds of hesitation is a confession. The respondent received the letter from a personal file. "Your Honor, there is no envelope." "No envelope," Judge Moreau repeated. She wrote something on her notepad and underlined it twice. Vance rose. "Your Honor, the petitioner requests that this letter be submitted for forensic handwriting analysis. We also note for the record that the respondent has demonstrated a pattern of forging signatures and fabricating documents, as established by Exhibits A through H. We believe this letter is consistent with that pattern. Granted, Judge Moreau said. The letter will be held as a contested exhibit pending analysis. Kelly returned to his table. Megan's posture had not changed, but her fingers, resting on the table's edge, pressed down hard enough to bend the nails. Vance stood again. Your Honor, the petitioner would like to introduce one final body of evidence. Exhibit I. She opened the blue folder. The overhead projector lit up with Sophie's first drawing. The tall woman with dark hair. The seated man with gray hair. The red lines of anger. The caption in a child's round handwriting, Mommy yelling at Grandpa about money. The courtroom shifted. Jurors leaned forward. Gallery members tilted their heads. Even Judge Moreau adjusted her glasses and looked longer than she had looked at any previous exhibit. Vance turned the pages slowly. Each drawing appeared on the screen for 10 seconds. The woman at the computer late at night. The argument in the kitchen. The child on the staircase, watching. The house with a dollar sign on the roof. The woman guiding the man's hand to sign papers. The Christmas Eve door, closed. The gray-haired man outside with his pie. The small face in the upstairs window, and then the last drawing. The gray-haired man alone at a table. No family, no food, no tree. Just walls and a lamp, and a caption that read, Grandpa alone on Christmas. The sound that came from the gallery was not a gasp. It was softer than that. It was the sound of people remembering their own fathers and grandfathers. The sound of recognition. The sound of shame held collectively by a room full of strangers who understood, suddenly and completely, what had been done to the man sitting in the witness chair. Kelly did not object. There was nothing to object to. A child's drawings are not hearsay. They are observations rendered in crayon and colored pencil by a witness who had no motive to lie and no reason to perform. Judge Moreau set down her pen. Miss Vance. Mr. Kelly. I have reviewed the exhibits, heard the testimony, and examined the contested letter. I will hear closing arguments after a 15-minute recess. Court is in recess. The gavel came down once. A single sound. Clean and final. Like the period at the end of a sentence that has taken a long time to write. I stepped down from the witness stand. Vance met me at the table and placed her hand briefly on my arm. You did well, Walter, she said quietly. Across the aisle, Megan stared at the blank projector screen where Sophie's last drawing had been. Her face was still composed, but her hands, folded in her lap, were trembling. The recess lasted 15 minutes. It felt like 15 years. I sat at the petitioner's table with my hands flat on the wood, the way I used to sit before delivering a final audit report to a board of directors. Vance reviewed her notes beside me, underlining phrases, circling exhibit numbers, her pen moving in the quiet rhythm of a woman who had done this many times and understood that the last words spoken in a courtroom are the ones a judge carries into deliberation. Across the aisle, Kelly leaned toward Megan. Their conversation was inaudible, but I could read the geometry of it. His shoulders angled away. Her chin lifted. He was managing expectations. She was refusing to accept them. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Moreau returned, settled into her chair, and placed both hands on the bench. Closing arguments. Miss Vance. Vance stood. She did not hold notes. She spoke from the architecture of the case itself. Each sentence built on the one before it, the way good buildings are built, foundation first. Your Honor, the evidence presented today is not ambiguous. It is not open to interpretation. It is arithmetic. $30,000, invoiced through a fictitious company. $52,000 borrowed against a home through a forged signature. $82,000 taken from a 71-year-old man who trusted his family. The respondent created the company. The respondent forged the signature. The respondent moved the money. The respondent purchased failed investments with stolen funds. And when the numbers began to collapse, The respondent planned to have the petitioner declared incompetent and sell his home to cover the losses. This is not a misunderstanding. This is elder financial abuse, identity theft, and forgery. We asked the court to rule accordingly. Kelly's closing was shorter. He repeated the words, family, intention, and misunderstanding. He suggested that the investments, though unsuccessful, were made in good faith. He asked the court to consider the emotional complexity of multi-generational households and the difficulty of financial decision-making during grief. He did not mention the forged signature. He did not mention the letter attributed to Dorothy. He did not mention Sophie's drawings. The things you do not say in a courtroom are often louder than the things you do. Judge Moreau removed her glasses, set them on the bench, and spoke. I have reviewed the exhibits, the testimony, the contested letter, and the observational drawings submitted as Exhibit 1. I have also reviewed the sworn statement of Derek Grayson regarding the power of attorney and HELOC consent forms he signed without reading, at the respondent's direction. She paused. The room held its breath. The court finds as follows. First, the invoice from Ridgemont Foundation Services is fraudulent. The entity does not exist. The employer identification number is improperly formatted. The payment of $30,000 was obtained through deception. Second, the home equity line of credit in the amount of $52,000 was opened without the petitioner's knowledge or consent. The signature on the application is not the petitioner's. This constitutes forgery and identity theft. Third, the funds from both sources were transferred to Westbrook Properties LLC, an entity solely owned and managed by the respondent and used for personal investment purposes without the petitioner's authorization. Judge Moreau looked directly at Megan. The respondent is hereby ordered to make full restitution of $82,000 to the petitioner, plus statutory interest. The court further orders the immediate closure of the unauthorized HELOC. The contested letter attributed to Dorothy Grayson is ruled inadmissible pending forensic analysis, and based on the testimony presented, is considered consistent with the respondent's established pattern of document fabrication. The court refers this matter to the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation of elder financial abuse, forgery, and identity theft. She paused once more. Regarding the minor children, given the evidence of domestic manipulation and the welfare concerns raised by the observational drawings, the court grants temporary custodial placement of Sophie and Mason Grayson with the petitioner, Walter Grayson, pending a full custody evaluation. The gavel came down. Megan did not move. Her attorney gathered his papers. Kelly said something to her, but she stared at the table, as though the surface held instructions for a situation she had never imagined. Derek rose from the gallery and walked toward me. His steps were slow, deliberate, weighted with something heavier than shame. He stopped 2 feet away. "Dad," he said, "I will spend the rest of my life making this right." "You don't need the rest of your life," I said. "You just need tomorrow, and the day after that. One at a time." He nodded. His eyes were wet, but his back was straight, and I recognized in his posture something I had not seen in years. Responsibility, the quiet, difficult kind that does not announce itself but simply shows up and begins to work. Ruth was waiting outside the courtroom. She handed me a thermos of tea, because that is what Ruth does. She does not give speeches. She gives tea and presence, and the kind of silence that heals. Spring arrived in Portland the way it always does. Slowly and then all at once. The cherry blossoms appeared on Southeast Spokane Street in the second week of March. I planted new roses along the front path, beside the ones Dorothy had planted 20 years ago. Sophie helped me choose the colors. She picked yellow. "Because yellow is honest," she said. I did not argue with that. Mason learned to ride his bicycle on the sidewalk in front of the house. Derek came by on Saturdays, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with nothing but his company. We did not speak about the trial. We spoke about weather and baseball and the way the light hit the river in the evening. Small things. Real things. The kind of things that hold a family together when the large things have tried to tear it apart. I kept the forensic spreadsheet in my desk drawer, beside Dorothy's reading glasses and the photograph of our wedding day. Not as evidence, not as a weapon, as a reminder that the truth, once spoken, does not need to be repeated. It simply stands. On a Sunday morning in April, I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh notebook. The cover was dark green. I opened it to the first page and wrote a single line at the top. Things that matter. Below it, I wrote 5 entries. Sophie's yellow roses. Mason's bicycle bell. Derek's Saturday visits. Ruth's tea. Dorothy's voice. Still here. I closed the notebook and placed my pen beside it. Outside, the cherry blossoms moved in a wind I could not see but trusted completely. The ledger was open. The numbers were honest. And for the first time in a very long time, every column balanced.